Efficiency Experts YouTube.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Efficiency Experts Roundtable podcast number 4. Today's podcast is a special one in what we look to be a series of State of RuneScape podcasts not related to the week's update. In particular, we're going to be discussing what incentivizes players in RuneScape to participate in content, and more specifically, whether or not the best gear and supplies should be tradable. Today, we have a guest panelist in ImRubic.
Hello.
And we also have several others who will introduce themselves right now.
I'm Alex, Arisa, and Eva.
Hey, it's Andrew, aka Determined.
My name is Jordan. I go by Wrathful.
Excellent. So before we go into why we prefer a particular type of tradable or untradeable or some combination, it's important to understand the history of best in slot gear. So Jagex has taken 3 main approaches in the past to releases of new premium gear or weaponry. Some things have been completely tradable, like the Abyssal Whip or God Wars 1 armor, and they've remained best in slot for years upon years, keeping that content camped and, salient in RuneScape players' minds. Some things have been completely untradeable, like tier 1 through 60 defenders, chaotics, and the completionist cape, among the more popular. A more complicated type of release is a combination of inferior tradable goods and superior untradeable goods, a la player-owned port scrimshaws. So just looking at these approaches, how do you guys feel that it's impacted your RuneScape experience, and do you have any particular preference when it comes to these, or is a combination exactly what we're looking for? Is the balance off?
Well, I do think that there needs to be an equal balance of tradable and untradeable gear. I have no problem with things like anything below level 80 gear being tradable. I think that all of that content is perfectly fine and should be expected in an MMO of this caliber. When I think it differs is when we get into the upper echelons of PVM for things like Virago, Raids, AOD, Telos, Araxor. I think that there needs to start being, or should have been, untradeable items to incentivize people to do and go out and PVM more.
Right. So in the recent past, we've seen the release of things like abilities and prayers as drops, tradable drops, mind you. And that might be a direction that RuneScape players want the game to go, where you can, brute force your way to PVM success by starting out with more capital. However, some people, like myself, would prefer that you have to earn that content through where it was released. For example, doing AOD for the prayers and not being able to buy them, or doing raids for Mazcab codices and not being able to buy them. So do we want more things to be untradeable? Do we want more things to be tradable?
Well, I think the short answer is yes, and I'll give you my reasoning. So RuneScape in 2017 faces a few realities, one of which is that it's an older game, it has an aging player base, and most of them are high-level players. And the other is that for the better part of the past decade, nearly every single best-in-slot item has been tradable upon release. It's been, valued at well over max cash, and players have been forced, since the reintroduction of free trade, to resort to money-making methods other than participating in the high-level content itself, the high-level PVM that drops these items, in order to make the money to obtain them. And we've seen them do that in a lot of different ways. Some players like to make money through skilling, even though it's slow. A lot of players have started using alts. And I think over the past 5 or so years, we've seen a massive surge in the usage of alts as a money-making method. And what we have to ask ourselves is, do we think that that is healthy? Is that the right way for a game to reward players with high-level content, to incentivize them to make a bunch of other accounts and to make money on them until they can just go to the Grand Exchange and buy it? Or would we prefer a different approach?
And it should be stated that this is almost uniquely a PVM problem. If we look at skilling methodologies, most of the skilling stuff is untradeable in with regards to accessing methods. So like your Inferno ads was, if that were tradable, how would that impact the game? Maybe not so much now, or yeah, your Yaktui stick. The majority of stuff like that has always been untradeable, but the majority of best in slot PVM gear has always been tradable. And that's an interesting juxtaposition when it comes to what players are participating in. And especially, as you said, as the player base is getting more high level and players are focusing less on XP as it becomes faster, and your 5.4 bills and your base 120s are reaching those goals, more and more people are moving towards what one may consider a less motivating system where most things are tradable.
Absolutely. I think more and more of the player base is now turning to PVM. They're being forced towards it because a lot of players are reaching their max goals, their 120 goals, and their 200 mil goals. And it's what's left. We have boss pets, of course, are an incentive for some players. And as PVM moves into, and I think it already has moved into the center of the game as the most relevant content, how can we get more players really? Because very few players do Telos, very few players do AOD. So how can we get more players to do bosses like that?
Right, because obviously the treasure hunt of getting that 600, 700 mil codex drop, it isn't enough. Players would rather run 5 dual girls and get that guaranteed codex in a week. They've got other stuff they can AFK. Everybody needs 5K Castle Wars games, or
Yes, sure
wants
they
to
do.
trim. So everyone needs it, Jordan.
No.
But anyway, players who can always develop secondary goals, and while they're working on those secondary goals, the majority of them don't mind waiting a little bit. So they'll run alts. It comes down to most players would rather be working for a paycheck than waiting to win the lottery. And sometimes that's what PVM feels like for the average player. But if these things weren't tradable, they would have to participate in the content. Just like players going for Insane Final Boss, they might not use those boss pets ever, and they probably won't use the majority of them ever, but they're willing to work for them and engage in the content and continue participating in this great game for that reward that can't be obtained through sheer GP.
And I want to note that the all-time strongest incentive in all of RuneScape for players to do content is the completion escape, which is an untradeable best in slot item. Everyone in this game does livid farm because they need that for completion escape.
Well, there's like a couple people who are holdouts.
Yeah, a few.
Yep.
A few, not
Or
naming names.
at least maxcape, right? Everyone maxes their skills or wants to max their skills. Most
Right.
of those players, yeah, a few holdouts who shall not be named in this podcast. Most of those players will do the additional comprex, which isn't so bad, 16 days according to Danny's spreadsheet, to get the completion escape. But then beyond that, what is the incentive to do other content, which is maybe only trim, or it's not even included in trim, maybe it's only true trim? I think you have a very steep cliff there, a very sharp cutoff, and there are only a few special snowflakes like you, Gunnar, that are interested in doing every single thing in the game because there's no incentive. So a lot of it ends up being relatively dead content.
And that also ties into another topic. I do want to get a couple of opinions from Rubik, if you have anything, before we move on to the incentive system with high-level PVM.
My only thing I could add on would be the whole incentive of once you obtain the gear, what incentive would there be for you to have to go back after you got it? Now, of course, for the most part, things like ports armor, you have the degrade, and then after a certain amount of time, you can go back and get it, and you can stockpile resources over that time. So you don't have to put in the same amount of effort to get it initially versus later down the line.
Right. So there's any number of systems that could be used, whether it's a degrade to dust mechanic or a simple upgrade mechanic that becomes a secondary drop. People are always going to want money, and some players do prefer to PVM for money than to play on ults. That's not as uncommon as it might seem. But if we were to add something, say, to AOD, where the codices in an alternate universe were not tradable, where if you were to get a codex after having all three unlocked, instead you'd get, a appraisal, or you'd get 1/3 of appraisal if they're this, depending on rarity. There's ways to incentivize people to continue returning, and it will always have the pet. So,
yep.
Yeah, I think another mechanic that we see is like with the wildy worm. It has the chance to drop like the worm scalp, the worm heart, whatever, and you use that to upgrade your gear, but then after a period it degrades back down and you have to return just to get the upgrade again. So that's another possible mechanic that could be used. But Jordan, I think you probably have the most experience out of all of us with other MMOs and how they create incentive systems to reward their players with the best gear. Do you want to give us some of your insights on that?
Yeah. So I'll give you a brief synopsis. I have played World of Warcraft on and off since 2004 at the absolute highest level possible, earning some of the realm firsts and even world first kills on some of the highest and hardest bosses in the game. World of Warcraft has a system that pretty much shaped the entire MMO market when it comes to gear and loot for all other MMOs, and that is the bind on pickup system, or once you have it, it is yours, but it's also the best. This kind of method gets you out and about over and over and over, week after week, killing the same bosses, doing the same raid, for a chance at that one item that, even if it's a 1 or 2% DPS increase, you want it because it's the best for you. It's a great feeling of accomplishment and esteem that you get when you're like, wow, I finally finished this awesome thing that I wanted, or yes, I'm done with my set now, and the system works. If it didn't work, it wouldn't have 10 million people playing their game,
right,
coming back year after year.
Not to mention, you said that you have, this feeling of accomplishment when you get a particular drop, but other players can tell what you've done to get that drop. When something is bind on pickup, for example, let's compare it to the comp cape in RuneScape. People know what you've done when you're wearing a comp cape. When you're wielding a staff of Sliske, for example, they don't know if you killed Telos. They probably assume that you bought bonds because people
I
assume
personally assume that you bought it with RHTP that you earned with alts, or even you RWT'd, or you bought bonds and sold them. But there are so many ways you can get it.
Right, and I think that might be skewed by the fact that we think Telos is, not super popular, but everybody wants a T92 staff, but it doesn't have the same feel.
And it harkens back to the era of, I'm going to throw this in there, what do you want to call it, Solomon's Store, where, you could see what everyone was wearing and you knew what they had. But that kind of idea in World of Warcraft was incredible in a sense that you'd be walking through Stormwind, which is a capital city, and you would see this one player, and you'd be like, holy shit, they have that gear. Yeah, they're wearing Thunder Fury, Blessed Blade of the Wind Seeker. And, it's just like this insane achievement where you're like, wow, that person went out and they earned this, and it took them months and
Right.
months to get this
Right.
one specific legendary item, or they completed this raid that ended up taking 5 months until the first guild in the world killed the last boss.
Right, and save for maybe insane final boss. There's really nothing like that in RuneScape. You don't see gear and be like, "Wow," you know. They
No, you
worked
don't.
really hard for that.
But if they had that kind of implementation or system in RuneScape, I'm going to bring up a topic that I think would help the game immensely into pushing more people into wanting to do PVM, not only for money potential, but DPS increase and that feeling of accomplishment and esteem. I'm going to throw out Telos for an example. We have the 3 base T92 two-handed weapons coming from Telos, all of which are cost billions of GP. The bow and the Zeros two-hander costs about 1.35 bill, and the staff is about max cash. Now, though they're great, they're awesome weapons. But what if, by going out and doing Telos, you had the opportunity to upgrade this to tier 93 or tier 94 through a upgrade patch that is dropped specifically from Telos, gives it a different cosmetic appearance, and shows people, wow, this guy killed Telos doing X, Y, and Z. Maybe there's even a threshold requirement, like you need to be at a certain enrage to participate into getting these drops, just to show and prove to people that you've gone out there, you've shown what you can do, and you've earned it with something that is better. Now, I think that gives you the incentive program required to push people into a situation where they'll want to go out and PVM instead of run. I personally own 2 Dwoger alts, and I'm running them almost at all times. I'm, that's how I make my money. I don't do any money-making methods on my main. I do not.
Right. And
Simple as that.
Some of us play 07, some of us do divination, some of us do dwokers. Like, there's, at least in the efficiently minded community, there's very little incentive to do superfluous PVM. I mean, people like myself will go for pets, but that's again, you're not going to use them. They're not going to tell anybody what you've done.
Our perspective may be skewed. There certainly
Right.
is a large PVM community. We can only speak to our experience and, within efficiency experts, what we see people do. But even then, we see some people doing PVM, but mostly people want to just make the money and buy the items, and they're all tradable. And it's just the easiest way to get instant gratification. There's no sense of achievement. I will say, even for things that are not overpowered or an incredible DPS increase, like even earning Acto through raids, Gunnar and I are both working on our Acto sets now, I find that pretty enjoyable. I like the
I agree.
mechanics.
Yep.
You get it, you work towards it over a period of time. It takes months. It's a community activity, large team of 10 people. And I think that raids are probably considerably more popular than Telos is.
Definitely.
I've gone in raid FC after reset and had it be full, where you can't even get in. So I think that just speaks to the relevance of the content, and that where Jagex has experimented with this type of drop mechanic, it's worked pretty well.
And when we look at like Ironman accounts and whatnot, when you see them with certain gear, you know for a fact that they had actually worked to get all of that. Like most of the gear that is tradable is very easy to get through buying it through the grinding stage. But when you're on an Ironman, it can take days, weeks just to get a single item sometimes.
Right, and this is why I specifically have been working on comping my Iron Man, because I have lost the sense of achievement in RuneScape. While I still enjoy playing on my main, I don't get any sense of gratification when I go out and I own every single T90 and all the weapons and armor and all that bullshit in my bank on my main. Billions of GP of items. I feel zero accomplishment for all of that. granted, it took time to make the gold, but when I have something on my Iron Man account, I feel fantastic. I'm like, wow, I went out there and I earned this. You max on an Iron Man, and you're like, wow, I did all of this by myself. It's
Right.
the same reward system pushed to you
Right.
in a different avenue.
Right. And despite having a limited viewpoint, as Andrew mentioned, we can speak to human psychology. And delayed gratification is often much more fulfilling. And the fact that you could, if every player were to just log in and get a staff of Sliske, would you ever be impressed by seeing one? Of course not. But if it were to be untradeable and somebody had to do tell loss at X%, you would be envious. And the relief of envy is a very, very strong motivator for human beings.
Yeah, I think we talked about when we were doing a little prep for this that, you know, a lot of games have frequent dopamine payoffs, frequent rewards that, trigger that like video gaming sense of happiness in your brain. And in RS, there's really like one or
99.
two huge ones.
Comp cape, max cape.
Yeah. And then there's nothing in between. And it'd be nice if we saw that more evened out by more frequent drops, more progress. And I'm not saying that everyone should go full Iron Man. I don't think that that's the right approach either. But I would love to see more of a balance. And I'd like to see Jagex do more of these mechanics, especially the superior inferior mechanic, I think works extremely well.
Yeah.
With scrimshaws, you if you hate ports, you don't have to do ports. You can never do ports and you can get the benefits of scrimshaws. But if you choose to do it, then you'll save money. You'll get a stronger reward, 4 hours instead of 3 hours, and a slight increase in the effect as well.
And
Right.
as you were saying, like the higher end stuff, while being untradeable is good, we don't have to make every single thing untradeable. There can be certain tradable components that help you build up to that untradeable thing that when you get it, it's even better than what it was before, basically.
Right. I love the idea for Telos of an upgrade patch. I think that it would make the content immediately much more relevant. A lot of people who just bought their tier 92s would then go to get them upgraded to get that untradeable drop. And I think we could see that mechanic used a lot of other places. It's kind of used now with the tier 70 through 90 defenders. They're just unfortunately not widely used because they're not super powerful.
Because they're defenders.
Right.
No, that's because they were nerfed.
Yeah. But that is a system that at least I believe most of us are look favorably upon, is that T70 through 90 system where there is a tradable and untradeable component. And the positive externality on existing content, for example, Barrow's pieces are going to maintain their value better if they are consumed to make something that players are going to use at a high level. Next pieces are going to maintain better value. Drygores are going to, never mind, Drygores are like 2 GP, but the idea of adding increased utility for existing content to create something new and untradeable and best in slot, it's not new, and I think it's proven to be very successful. So I personally would like to see more of that in the future.
There are also positive implications of adding a system like this. You're running into, well, now you're pushing more people into doing these activities. More of these items are being injected into the game. You're stimulating the economy more. It's
Right,
an
and
actual
those
overall
items-
benefit.
Those items are coming out of the game when they're made untradeable as well.
Correct.
And the
Yeah.
cycle involves more players and creates content that people want to participate in,
Yeah.
which I think is the end goal.
That's what we need badly, is getting people engaged with this content beyond just giving it a completionist requirement. How many players do we know or have we seen who will just log in and immediately ask upon the release of a new update, what's the new comp rec, what's the new trim rec?
90% of clan.
Exactly. And it should go beyond that. The be all and end all of this game shouldn't be the comp cape, and you shouldn't just be logging in to maintain your comp cape. we need real rewards that will get you out and doing that. Even like, stuff like Hydrix Dragons. You know, we need more content to give a reward that must be earned and not simply bought.
Like last week, we implied that a potential fix to the Hydrix Dragon would be give them the best bones in the game, which makes them immediately relevant.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and they could even be untradeable.
They
How
could
about
be
that?
untradeable. Yep. Or not.
Or not.
Right. We want the problem is there has to be some sort of motivation for every content, for every piece of content. And that's where Hydrix Dragons, at least upon release, were not largely successful. Things either have to be very, very fun content. Like we're talking like Castle Wars in 2007, where there's not really a, reward at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, but you're playing it for the game itself. Or it has to be very, very good XP, very, very good GP, or it has to give an untradeable reward usable elsewhere in the game that you're going to want to earn. And I think it's so much easier. And, this is going out to any potential developers. It's easier to create that relevant reward than it is to do either of the former and balance either of the former. They could have made Hydrix Dragons, every single one of them, drop an Onyx. Would that have made them more desirable? Yes. Would it have broken Onyx? Yes. They could have made it 1,000,000 Slayer XP per hour. Would that have been good for the game? Probably not, but it would have made people do them. So you can balance content much easier if you give it untradeable rewards and allow those to be used elsewhere. And I think that's, just another positive externality of more untradeable best in slot material.
Well, speaking in that same avenue, I'd like to mention the problem we are also having with untradeable and tradable food. The fact that Rocktail have been the primary source of healing food is,
I think it's just it is silly, and it's silly because of how little time and effort it takes to obtain and cook a rocktail compared to a shark soup, for example. There's no reason why rocktail should be what they are. Even if shark soup were to be upgraded to the point where it were 3,200 healing, that would be great, because it would reward the extra requirements and effort people put into creating that. And it also has the opportunity cost of you don't get the chimes. You'd be eating the chimes. So yeah, I definitely think it's a big issue. And juxtapose it even then with what most people use when they need even more healing than a rocktail, which is a Sarah Brew.
Yeah, I think the status of healing, especially in the game, is severely unbalanced. So first of all, brews have a bunch of advantages over all actual food in that, they don't have an adrenaline penalty. You can store much more life points in one inventory space. And pretty much the only disadvantage is that it's more expensive, but that's not a significant deterrent if you're doing a boss that's like 8 to 10 mil an hour.
And getting faster kills because you're not costing adrenaline.
Exactly. So
Well, it drains your stats.
It does, but
Overload rebuffs.
you have
right.
overload.
Right.
Yeah, that used to be a bigger issue, much bigger issue. And then of course now we've even seen people using some tryhards have used the Guthix Rest because it doesn't drain your stats, even though you get half the healing. And all the best food in the game, like there's no real reason a rocktail soup should not heal 3,000 LP or more. And same goes for a shark soup. There is a much more limited supply than rocktail. They're hard to obtain. I actually don't. Rocktail soup doesn't have a huge incentive to engage with that because you don't need to. It's very optional, as opposed to scrimshaws, where there's a strong incentive to make your own because you get a better benefit. Rocktail soups you could simply buy. I think they would be much more relevant if they were made untradeable and buffed to about 3,000 LP or even 3,200 as a hero.
Right. And in that same vein, the shark soup from the Ark, which may I suggest be renamed Wabagong soup, just to keep with the shark to rocktail consistency, keeping rocktail better. That has so many requirements that there's no reason for it. I have a hard time believing if you were to tell me 6 or 7 years ago, what food will you be using in 2017 PVM at the hardest boss that drops T92 weapons? Well, you're going to be using Rocktail and Bruise. I would think you were crazy. There's nothing better is going to come out. They're not going to incentivize players to create their own supplies that could be untradeable.
Not to mention, another reason potions have a huge advantage is because of flasks. And I think flasks would be even better if they were untradeable. Now, you might disagree. It might be a controversial statement, but
slow down.
I think if you want 6,000 LP in one inventory space, then you should have to do your daily flasks. That's pretty overpowered, in my opinion.
I think another controversial thing would be making the Constitution skill more impactful to some degree, and like reworking and introducing a healing class or something. I'm not exactly sure what that would be or what it would require for Jagex to do, but it's something.
Yes.
They already have a minor framework in place with some of the lunar spells and some of the Saren spells. Yet the problem is it's not fleshed out. It doesn't work properly. And you're completely correct. If we had one guy who was quote unquote healing class in raids or in high-end bossing PVM, you could negate some of the healing effects that we're running into the problems with. Like, let's say there was ability that if you were standing in the radius of a sunshine of the player who casts it, it gave everyone debilitate. Like, it's not difficult to do. They just haven't implemented it.
Well, the big thing with RS3 PVM, though, is you want more DPS, because more DPS gets the kill done faster, you take less damage. So there isn't any bosses where you'd want to, like a support type, you just want another guy DPSing.
Not yet.
Yeah.
For things that are time locked, so say for example, Virago were to deal, 8 times the damage it currently deals, and all the phases were time locked, you would want somebody to heal. Like it just because it doesn't exist in the game currently doesn't mean that it won't be required in the future.
We've got a designated ice asylum on our raid team, so I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Oh boy.
Well, on that note of Virago, the whole time lock mechanic there, in my opinion, isn't very well done. It's basically your base tank and bomb tank do stuff, and everyone else can just AFK.
Oh, you're totally right. You're totally right. Yeah, but that's a topic of discussion for a PVM balancing and mechanics podcast.
Well,
exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting because, if you want to see more roles, and even if you want to see more WoW type mechanics in terms of gear, do you think that if Jagex did make changes like this, that RS would start to lose its identity a bit as an MMO, which is very different from most that are like extremely PVM focused, has a strong skilling side to the game? Do you think that would actually be harmful?
No, I don't.
Well, I think with EOC, the whole system is supposed to revolve towards that type of thing, but I don't think that content should be forced to lock behind classes.
Yeah, that's the one thing they've never
That's the one.
done.
RS has always had that going for it. You can always change and be what you want to be for any particular role. Tomorrow you could go and say, I'm only going to skill from now on. RuneScape does have its unique attributes. It's much more focused on the journey than the destination, compared to a lot of other games, because it's so freaking long. Like, WoW has given players max level accounts on the same day as expansion releases. Up to that point, max level.
Well, no, they give you 10 levels before max level, but
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, you know what I mean.
What do you mean,
So,
Gunnar? You think RS is long?
well, I mean, it could be longer, but anyway. So
Wait, you're
the
not done with
issue,
it yet?
the issue is if we think it's going to lose its identity just by reinforcing traditional MMO qualities and reward structures, I think they're traditional and they're ubiquitous because they're successful. Like there's a reason that they work. They motivate people. People like raids and WoW in particular. You have, say, a 3% chance of getting what you're looking for from a particular boss, but you'll do it every week. You'll do it every week because there are other rewards. You can grind for reputation. Or in the case of RuneScape, you're grinding for GP. I don't think that's a detriment. And I don't think it would make RuneScape lose its identity because you can skill for 10,000 hours.
Well, we already have the
not other
raids
games
system.
that are like that. Right.
The raid system is actually perfect. Like
I agree. Raids could be longer themselves. They're only like 25 minutes.
I would love an extended or secondary raid. I think that the entire mechanic of raids is you have your chest, you have a chance of getting Acto or you don't. Like it's not, I mean, it's 50-50, you either get it or you don't, right? No. But
right. Well, in other MMOs, there's a structure by which people roll. Like they say whether they need something or not.
You do have a need or greed system, or you have a DKP system, which is like
you earn points based on how many times you've done a boss, and you can spend those on particular rewards over other people who have not participated in that many bosses. I'm not saying that RS should, incorporate all of those systems. What I am saying is that at the end of the day, if you don't want to do raids in World of Warcraft, you're very limited in what you can do at the highest level. Like you can grind PvP, or you can grind PvP, or you can raid.
In RS, you can ignore the vast majority.
Yeah, in RS, you don't really have to PVM if you don't want to. There's very little stuff behind PVM locked doors.
You have to kill one of everything for Compcape. That's about it, really.
Yeah, that's it. And besides that, it's much more skilling focused. What's the max level in a WoW skill? It was 375.
I believe it's about 700 now.
Okay, so it's a little bit higher. But so after you get your fishing to 700, there's
take 10 hours.
Which does not take as much time as getting, I don't know, level like 60 fishing in RuneScape. You're only incentivized by getting what you need to boss. So, and there's no reason why RS should not incorporate untradeable fish, untradeable food, untradeable potions, like the Super Sarah brew never should have been tradable. Personal opinion.
I agree.
Yeah, RuneScape will not lose its identity by incorporating more untradables, in my personal opinion.
I mean, you have to think of it in Shark Soup is already untradeable. It is literally the amount of effort that goes into it. Like it's like 96 fishing, 96 woodcutting, 96 hunter, 90 farming. I'm probably missing something.
It takes forever to make.
5,000 might be a little.
But
high.
No, it honestly takes like 30 times as long to get
as one rock.
Right, but
if it were untradeable,
it should heal like 3,250.
At least
it gives it an advantage over a brew in a sense that you can use that.
It's a higher instant heal, and well, first of all, you can combine food with brews.
Right.
So it's not disadvantaged against the brew in.
And it's not like you even devalue the brew.
Right, exactly, because you're still going to use the brew if you want more in the slot. It could heal 5,000. I know that sounds like a hyperbole, but a brew heals 6,000, and there's very few places in the game where you cannot sustain.
So much time.
Yeah, you can't.
Use the brew over making a shark soup.
Right. A brew that you can buy on the GE for 20K, which you make losslessly on your Divolt in 12 seconds.
You
So
need 20K in 12 seconds.
no, I just threw out a
Can you
number.
show
All
me
right.
your div method?
That was based on nothing whatsoever. But yeah,
That's just 6 mil an hour. It's not that bad.
not that far off.
Might make more on certain alts.
Right.
Well, on that same kind of note, how do you feel about like the efficiency of your food use? Like if I want to make money at Next, I'm not going to grind for untradeable food, right? So how do you feel about, I don't know, just that kind of idea? Like,
Well-
where would untradeable food be efficient to use?
I feel like it is hearkening to the high-end PVMer. Like, let's say I was trying to push 4K Enraged Telos. While that is currently completely unobtainable with current methods, armor, everything, you know, it's just not going to happen. Introducing things like a tier 94 staff that is obtainable via Telos and giving us food that heals between 3 and 5,000, you know, it starts making those long-term goals more achievable in where you probably couldn't do it with lesser supplies.
It does allow Jagex to make more challenging content. The fact that we've been stuck again on Rocktails and Brews for the better part of a decade is frankly astounding.
The only disadvantage to like super brews and rocktail soups is that they're kind of expensive, but it's so marginal to the high level PVMer who can sell all these drops and make, 10 to 20 mil an hour that it's barely even a concern for them. So
well, I mean, at high-end levels, Telos is over 40 mil an hour, so...
Exactly. So of course you'll use the super brews, but you could get those players doing, we talk about getting skillers involved in PVM, you could get the PVMers doing a little skilling if they needed to make their supplies.
Right. It's completely optional. Like, not everybody's going to do the arc just for this food that, as you said, they don't need at Next because they can do it with existing gear. But for the player who either A, needs it to do existing gear, or B, wants it to do it more effectively or to use with future gear, they're going to be incentivized to interact with that material where they otherwise wouldn't be. I don't think there's any disadvantage to
interacting with more of the game's content is literally never a bad thing.
And it's still optional, like you said. And there's some other existing content that I think maybe isn't working quite as well as we would like it to, or isn't getting as many players involved as it should be. I'd like to touch on a few of those briefly. And one of them, I think, is tier 90 boots. So, quick poll. Who in this podcast uses tier 90 boots?
There you go. That's your answer.
I've used them before.
Alex, you use them?
I used to, yeah.
Where at?
Next.
And
Interesting
did you realize that you were wasting your money and stopped?
No, it was worth it.
It was worth it.
So despite
Well,
a few nutcases out there, not many people use it for PVM, as it is much more costly than worthwhile.
Right.
I actually know more people that use it to keepsake them because they look good than they do to actually use them for PVM.
Yeah,
Right.
for the unfamiliar, the degrade cost is around, I think, 2 mil per hour just for a pair of boots, which is going to take...
Which provide marginal benefit.
Which provide like a 0.1% DPS increase, or something on that order. And I'll give you straight up my proposal to revitalize tier 90 boots, and that would be the scales to make them, which are dropped from Rune Dragons, make it 1, considerably more common, and 2, untradeable. Now you already have lots of reasons to do Rune Dragons. They're good money. You need Kessie pieces if you're a true completionist, although not everyone will go for that. But I think that would immediately make tier 90 boots much more relevant, and it's a much better fix than just making the scales more common. Like, making it cheaper doesn't make
necessarily
you want to go kill Rune Dragons.
Right.
Or you could even, I mean, they don't even necessarily have to be untradeable. You could just make it so you only need 2 scales. The boots degrade to 0, and you recharge them with existing steadfast ragefire boots like that. Like, you've got multiple options.
That would revitalize Glaciers.
Right.
But,
I mean, but that's not a bad thing,
Yeah,
is
either
it?
right. There's
It just
options.
redirects it.
There's options.
Yeah.
well, but then if the Glacier boots are tradable, it's just again like a GP issue.
I
That's
guess.
why I think there should be one of the components should be untradeable. That's a great and obviously more common because that's the reason they're not used is the rarity. And there's some other stuff like that. For instance, fletching as a skill, we know it's pretty dead. It could badly use a rework. The by far dominant method for players to train fletching from like level 60 or whatever it is to 200
55.
mil. 55, thank you, Jordan, is to make an untradeable low tier arrow, which is only required for like one Slayer monster, and they will likely never use, and perhaps is only slightly more relevant now because you can disassemble them for precise components, although it's very slow. So, broads, I think, are horrible for the fletching skill. I think it's kind of ridiculous that so many players spend so much money and so much time making all these arrows that have zero use whatsoever in the game. And I think having tier 90 arrows be a drop from Araxor is a mistake. Even if Araxor just dropped a shard, like
Arrowheads.
do, that you can then make into those arrows.
How about
that's
this?
fletching.
How about this? Araxes Venom, and it comes in a vial, and it upgrades 1,000 arrows to T95. Why not? Makes them untradeable. Like there's, you're right. What we need though is the base to be made from skilling, because there is going to be an impetus to adding skilling requirements to PVM/gear content.
I say if you do like a shard type mechanic, you take the shards, which are untradeable, and then you fletch them into your tier 90 arrows. So you have to process the drop. You get the drop, but then you have to process it using the skill, which means you have to get that 90 fletching. You can't just like make an alt and then get 90 range on it and put an oxbow on it.
I think this also gets into the whole concept of a lot of the skills are outdated and need complete revitalization.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
I want to bring up something else that I thought of recently. So the Hydrix dragons and the gym dragons in general, they don't drop anything other than the new armor, basically. But what if their bones had some sort of like crafting or fletching oriented thing where you could make those into like bone bolts, but they're like gym bone bolts or something like that. Something along the lines where you can actually use that for fletching or crafting. Idea.
I mean, it gives you both a fletching and a crafting requirement all in one. You can turn them into like headless arrows or bolt tips, and you can attach them to ascension bolts and Araxite arrows. There you go, done.
Yeah, I think there's any number of ways that Jagex has seen in the past that make content worthwhile that for some reason are not applied to content that is ripe for it, like the gemstone dragons. And we can only
What? Did you lag there? What?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe.
We lost you. But yeah, certainly fletching is one of many skills which could use revitalization. And why not take the opportunity when you're releasing this new content, which you need to give an incentive for players to participate in? Why not take the opportunity to tie that into an existing skill that could use a little, TLC? Yeah. I think that would be very serendipitous. And another issue I have, and so this is on my list, this has gained a lot of steam. I've seen it on Reddit multiple times in the past several months, is the issue of high tier resources in many skills are dropped in large quantities at bosses, which destroys the incentive to then train those skills. So now we have more relatively dead content. And I'll give you a few examples. Blood runes, I know some people are see them. I want to say lots of them are brought into the game from PVM and from Slayer. Fellstock seeds, these are the highest level herb seeds in the game. They're dropped by dark beasts, among many other monsters, which is the reason that the highest level seed in the game is worth like 600 GP. And then Rocktail, the highest level fish, is dropped in huge quantities, not only by Telos, Rots, Virago, and at raids in their raw form, but also dropped as cooked at QBD, Araxor, and AOD, which bypasses not only fishing, but cooking as well. Not to say that people don't cook Rocktail.
No, I
Right.
mean, I think there's a huge demand for raw rocktail as is, and there's a lot of people always in World 84, but you are correct.
Yeah, I'm not saying all of these are dead content, although I would say like Fellstock.
When's the
Is
last
kind
time
of
you
dead.
cut magic logs?
When's the last time you caught a shark?
Well, that's one thing. That's one example which is good. Is the Elder logs have so far escaped. Now, as to whether that'll continue to be the case, that remains to be seen. But they're like the best example of a high tier skilling resource, which is still holds a lot of value because it's not dropped anywhere. Unfortunately, you still can't train. You still can't cut elder logs to make money because they're so hard to get even with woodcutting that it turns out to be like 800k per hour.
Something that isn't spoken much about, that is a pro for having these creatures drop these drops, is that it prevents bots from being effective to a significant degree, which it helps it so that these resources aren't farmed and so then or aren't farmed to any competitive degree, and it's worthwhile to get them from drops. But at the same time, it makes it also adds a difficulty requirement, which is helps that way. But at the same time, mining and smithing got delayed because they want to rework the drop tables to prevent this type of thing from occurring.
That is a good point. And if we do go back to, 07 in our minds, then we know that a lot of these resources that were, time consuming to get through skilling would be brought into the game by bots because
I mean,
they filled that
they
gap
still
in the
are.
economy.
I think there's something along the lines of like 25% of all 07 accounts logged in at all times are botting. So
We might need a citation for that at some point.
Yeah.
Citation
but
needed.
I mean,
I believe it was like 12 to 15%, but I could be
Okay.
wrong.
but
Alex
even
has
still,
declared the podcast is a citation-filled zone. All data must be sourced.
even still, like you have a lot of that content being chins, being magic logs, being yew trees, being flax picking bots, being bowstring stringing bots. Like those are all like still relevant in 07.
Solution. Make them untradeable.
I don't think that works.
I mean, it does work in the extent that if there were to be a log that came out that took 99, and it were untradeable, and you had finished all your arc requirements, it provided the best woodcutting XP in the game, you would have no reason to get a bot supplied log. You would be getting it yourself. It would provide an added benefit of either more fire making XP or being able to fletch better bows. Maybe you fletch X amount of them into an actual useful bow, which I think they're starting to get more away from, hey, let's make 100,000 things that we'll never use any of, to let's make fewer things that we might actually use. So
Right.
in the future, as we see these reworks, you might also see more untradeable skilling content that ends up being useful for PVM or, tangential skilling.
I mean, arguably, bamboo is the best woodcutting XP in the game, and it is untradeable. It just doesn't have use or application beyond.
Right. Right.
earning
I was
chimes.
just saying for the player that had a player would only do this hypothetical piece of content had they
Yeah.
already finished Salty.
If you want players to engage with skills, you know, I think instead of dropping resources in vast quantities from PVM to disincentivize bots, a better way to do it is, like you said, if we had a tier or a layer of untradeable skilling resources at the very top of their respective gathering and artisan skills, then that absolutely would get players training all those skills again and would destroy the potential for bots to, camp those resources and ruin them for everyone else. Like if there was a rune that was above Blood Rune, if we had a new damaging spell that did slightly more damage, but you had to craft the runes yourself and they were untradeable, would you be rune
Yes, I
crafting?
would do it.
Probably.
Probably
Yeah.
because it gave good XP too.
Especially if at the same time they came out with a boss that needed you to use those particular spells. I mean, it's really game design 101 that more related content is going to fare better. Things that are standalone have to be the best at something to be useful. You know what I mean? People aren't going to do content that isn't the best at something unless it helps them do something else. And I think that's, again, much easier to incorporate and balance, which can be a struggle.
All right. Well, is there any other existing content or future content that you guys want to touch on?
I would just like to see more updates like ports, where we have an inferior tradable and a superior untradable. You know, that goes right back into the idea of a weapon patch that increases the what have you, uh,
Yeah, I think
T92 to 94. It's all the same concept. There needs to be some sort of higher end motivation to get this upper tier.
that's my absolute favorite mechanic, would be an upgrade patch for lots of existing gear dropped by the same bosses but untradeable.
Right.
So
And you can look at that as a huge success, ports as well, because you'd say, oh, why wouldn't players just get scrimshaws, if they're better? But looking at the cost of the tradable scrimshaws and the fact that people pay that willingly,
They're like 4 mil right now.
they are and
ports are
rising.
some of the most successful content in the game. No
I would
question.
completely agree.
Like one of the best
Completely agree.
updates of the past few years, for sure.
And it might not necessarily be the design itself as in the gameplay. I think a lot of it is the reward structure.
It
and
is.
and the one, it's the time cap for it. Time caps with very powerful rewards will make people do content. One, they can't get bored of it because they can't camp it. Two, ports in particular runs in real lifetime, so it can work around your schedule. So ports was successful for a number of reasons, but first and foremost, I think the reward structure gives people choice, and choice has immense value. You can do it to make money, which a lot of players do, or you can do it for the untradeable scrimshaws that are basically the best feasible pocket slot items in the game. You have your nuanced Berserker Blood Essence, you have your Armored books, but by and large, Scrimshaw of the Elements, Scrimshaw of Cruelty, and Scrimshaw of Vampirism are going to be some of the most useful PVM unlocks you ever get.
That was literally the first thing I unlocked on my Iron Man with ports through scrolls. Was I unlocked Scrimshaw of Vampirism.
Yeah, not to mention you get scroll choice, right? So there's a lot of great things and things to love about ports. And, like for future content, you could have, like you were kind of talking about with WoW, an untradeable currency, which you earn by participating with the content, and then you get to choose from a slate of rewards, and that slate of rewards can include a tradable tier, which you can sell if you prefer to do that content for profit.
Yeah,
we
or
sort of already
definitely.
have that with Techie, to be honest
Right.
with you.
Yep.
Exactly. With Tech.
And we're starting to move towards factional reputation. If you look at God Wars 2, there are so many diverse groups in the game. You've got, goblins and dwarves, just to use a recent invention example, that we're getting this new achievement system. Why not incorporate some type of renown where you can do tasks to earn rewards with certain factions that are all untradeable? It's not that hard to code. It's not that much development time to give players a heck of a lot of content to do.
We already have the God Emissary system. You could improve upon that immensely. Earn reputation with the Godless, Zeros, what have you, whatever you want. Give them all the same, reward structure, just reskin or rename the reward. And, you get people engaging in content that they otherwise wouldn't engage in. And give, you could even give it rewards like some of the very useful dungeoneering scrolls, like Scroll of Proficiency or
retroactively reward, in this case, most, if not all of us are comped, but retroactively reward certain quest lines with renown with certain factions. You do the vampire quest line, you become more renowned with vampires. Basically, you can reskin the God Wars 2 seal reward shop with factional currency and give it a similar reward structure. You get better drops at particular bosses, you get cosmetic items, you get little skilling tools. Like, the amount of content here is ridiculous that you could easily add to the game, untradeable, and revitalize a lot of content.
So, in summary, we hate free trade.
I wouldn't go that far.
Exposed.
Free trade is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I think it's one of the reasons for the revitalization of the RS economy since that time. I don't know if you guys remember 76King and all that crazy stuff.
And
junk trading. Oh God, junk trading.
It was the worst.
Do you know how much money in junk I paid for a stupid crown, the kingly crown from Kingly Implings?
I don't want to know.
Is that there was good junk and there was bad junk.
Mint cakes.
Oh yeah, mint cakes.
I remember mint cakes.
Speaking of mint cakes,
you could only get one of them.
Right. Speaking of mint cakes, though, now that you can get them from the Gnome, you get them from Hef and Agility, but can't you get them from Gnome Delivery as well?
I'm sure most of them. Come
either way.
The Hef and source is better.
Either way, but Gnome Delivery could give factional rep. Like, there's so many things. You know, the old axe spheres in Dorgashun? Like, there's so many things that you could... Yeah, there's so many things that you could add to get factional reputation that would help you in other areas of the game. I'm honestly excited about this thing that I just made up.
Have 7 Gnome Restaurant alts because that's what Alex keeps
right, because the rewards will be for Hazel memes. Yeah, you don't let anyone know it's 20 mil an hour. Anyway, so in summary, factions would be a good idea because rewards would be untradeable and revitalize existing content, just like patches would for existing gear, just like better sources of food Speaking of that, what would they be structured after? But maybe one of the better balanced skills in the game, herblore. Yeah. I almost said it British.
Absolutely. Herblore, I think, is one of the best skills in the game right now, especially with combination potions. Everyone in the game does combo pots. Everyone in the game makes their overloads and then makes either holies or supremes or searing overloads or what have you. Why? Because it's well balanced. There are tradable potions, but if you want the best stat boost, you do Herblore. And that's why I think it's a great skill.
Some of the best content in the game comes from Herblore in the sense that we're talking about, where you can buy an anti-fire potion, but you've got to go out and thieve phoenix feathers to make a super anti-fire. You don't have any choice other than that.
Everyone thieves the desert phoenix. with Signs of the Porter, with whatever, but everyone thieves the Desert Phoenix at one point.
Everybody fondles the Phoenix.
Exactly.
baby.
Not to mention, not just overloads, but replenishment pots are excellent as well. So,
Right,
And
right.
brood.
To participate competitively in high level content, you train the herblore skill. Why are other skills different?
yeah,
Why
don't you
is
train fletching
other
or
content different?
crafting,
Yeah, exactly. And I think,
crafting or smithing?
yeah, I think they'll move more towards that, but we'll see.
Well, yeah, I think just the bottom line is, you know, the highest tier rewards ought to be untradeable. Everything below that can be tradable. We can still have a very vibrant economy. We're not all going to be Iron Men, but the highest
I
tier
am.
rewards. Only Jordan will be an Iron Man.
Yeah, but as a final note, I think we've pretty much exhausted the topics here. You know, I'm okay with having to work really hard to get the best gear in the game. As long as there's an incentive program, I'll do it.
Right, and I think most people will.
Yeah.
I think most people will, and I think most people will find that more rewarding than a game that encourages, let's just say, less than 100% scrupulous in the eyes of some methodologies, like playing alt.
And we
Well,
are
I
going
could
to
I
talk
could
about
go out
alts.
and spend $500 on bonds right now.
Right, you could, and in the future, if we made an upgrade to Staff of Sliske that was untradeable, you could still use bonds to get your staff. That's fine. You just would have to do the PVM content to get an upgrade patch, which is also fine.
And it's
We
not even
are-
mandatory.
Yeah.
We are going to make a future podcast on alts and some of the most popular alt methods in the current metagame.
And whether or not it's good for the game.
Absolutely. So keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, you know, keep this in mind. Why do we use the alts? Because Jagex has not given us a reason not to.
Exactly. There's no to dissuade us from doing so would be as simple as encouraging a more broad range of content for player involvement. Like, it's honestly that simple. This is a not necessarily a catch-all for every problem in RuneScape, but it's certainly a step in many right directions. So we have a couple of things here laid out, just off the cuff suggestions for existing content that we want to bounce off each other and see whether we agree, whether we disagree. So, Andrew, do you want to introduce some of those?
The new boss, the Ambassador, will be coming out. We don't know much about it other than it seems like a 5-man boss, and it might drop dual wield range or T92. But how do you guys feel about how the drops and mechanics of it will all work out?
I don't think anything will change, to be honest. I wish it would. I wish they would take into consideration some of the things we have to say. But in a general sense, I think it's going to be the same structure that we're currently dealing with right now.
I mean, I think they like to have consistency amongst the same tier. So for the Ambassador, which, if you guys are unfamiliar, Telos is the Warden. So the Ambassador will be named something else. We'll put the concept art in the description as well, but they're going to keep T92s basically the same in terms of obtainability and structure. That being said, that doesn't mean Jagex can't use this as an opportunity to improve upon the secondary motivating criterion for bosses. So AOD drops, T92 gear, but also gives access to T99 prayers, which are tradable in the form of codices. The Ambassador could very well drop very valuable abilities or other rewards. The mechanics, we can't even speculate, really, I don't think. But the rewards have to be comparable to AOD for it to be a successful boss experience.
I
And
would
Excel Ascensions.
Yeah, that's true.
I would like to see a group boss enrage mechanic similar to Telos, as to you climb the ladder, making it harder and harder, achieving better rewards. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, again, we do want to incentivize cooperation, and it has been said that the ambassador will be a 5-man boss. It was originally solo, however, that was changed after player response signified a will to step away from the Araxors and Telos's of Gielinor. So again, we can only really speculate as to what it's going to do. We can have our separate desires for it. But that being said, moving forward, there's no reason why existing content cannot be remedied to incorporate T93s or even T95s. They just came out with a next hard mode. January, I think. Who's to say that at some point in the future they won't come out with a corporeal beast hard mode using, existing assets, upgraded textures, and that could drop upgrades for T92
Iron shields, making defensiveness more useful.
Yeah, I mean, as to the mechanics, they can do whatever they want, but they can incorporate ways to upgrade the existing armor and weapons where untradeable is the best for the aforementioned reasons.
I think general consensus of this entire podcast is untradeable high-end content good, tradable high-end content bad.
I mean, not necessarily all bad. There has to be an incentive for people to continue to do content after they earn the untradeable rewards. So, for example, and this is just using an existing in-game piece of content. If you were to do next AOD and the codices were untradeable, why would you go after? The GP would be GP per hour, or return per hour rather, would be so greatly reduced that there'd be no reason for you to do AOD. However, if once you unlocked all the prayers, you had a better chance at receiving the T92 drop itself, or you unlocked double standard drops, something similar to that. There's any number of ways Jagex could incentivize the continued use of the content.
I mean, you could just re-roll codices to tier 92s.
Right, exactly.
Eventually, if they became too devalued, maybe that wouldn't be effective, but...
Yeah, but there's any number of things that they could do. They could just add more drops that give you either, hearkening back to the greatest suggestion I've had in the past 3 to 4 hours, reputation. If that reputation is hard enough to get and gives good enough rewards, it would incentivize players to continue doing content. A lot of these are just ideas, but I think they play into the majority of RuneScape players' psychologies and create lasting, impactful content that we've seen in the past. So anyways, I think that wraps up our discussion today. We are looking to do this more in the future with other topics that see a lot of discussion on RuneScape message boards and discussion servers. But next time, alts, probably? Yeah,
I'm thinking
Yeah.
alts.
Okay, so that's something we'll be looking at doing in the coming weeks after the next update, which, Rubik, can you give us a rundown of next week's update?
All right, so next week's update is the Easter event, which is a secret update right now. Then other than that, there's going to be a bunch of patch note side stuff, which is the buff bar improvements, the NXT improvements, and then just general patch notes.
Excellent, thank you. So look out for that in the next couple days. And as always, we thank you for watching. Please subscribe for future content, and we look forward to hearing your questions and comments.
And big thanks to Rubik for being our guest for tonight's podcast.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
No problem.
Also, check in the description. We've got a link to our Discord. Please feel free to drop by, give us any type of suggestions of content you'd like to see, come hang out, ask us questions about anything about the game. We've got lots of people here who are willing to give you advice and help out. Hope to see you. Thank you all for watching.